Okay, we are ready to start the presentation. I want to welcome everyone to today's webinar. First thing we want to do is go through a few housekeeping items to bear in mind so you know how best to participate in today's event. Liz, if you want to go to the housekeeping slide. Thanks. We've taken a screenshot of the example of the attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this on your computer desktop. It usually is in the upper right-hand corner. By default, you're listening to your computer speaker system. If you prefer to join over the phone, just select the telephone icon in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed and you can log in that way. We want this to be an interactive conversation, so you will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenter. You just want to type them into the questions pane of the control panel. You can send those at any time during the presentation and we will be collecting them. We'll try to address as many of them as we can in the Q&A session before we end today's presentation. In addition, please do join us throughout the conversation on social media using the hashtag #StartsWithYou. Just a few other items we wanted to make you aware of. A copy of this presentation will be shared in the next few days, and we're also recording it. So we will post that on our website later this week, so you'll have access to all of that historical information. So with all of that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and turn over the presentation to our host for today's discussion, Scott Zeter.
Thank you, Juliet. My name's Scott Zeter, and I'm an executive vice president here at Grafton. I've been a social worker, a clinical social worker for 25 years in a variety of different roles, including direct family therapist, program coordinator, risk manager, and chief executive of a residential treatment facility. I came to Grafton about 10 years ago and was drawn to it by its extraordinary application of trauma-informed principles, not only in its treatment services, but also in its crisis intervention services, Ukeru being its current iteration. First off, I want to acknowledge that this discussion we're having today is a complicated discussion. We're aware that many people have very strongly held views about applied behavioral analysis and the use of this methodology with children. From a trauma-informed perspective, we don't believe that we can have a fruitful dialogue about this without acknowledging that the subject is loaded with feelings, but we would like to acknowledge that and move forward together in a very brief review of our approach at Grafton, our attempt to ensure that applied behavior analysis is enacted in a manner that gives attention to trauma and its impact on the brain. ABA is the process of studying behavior, assessing the factors that precede, accompany, and follow behaviors, and the manipulation of those factors to change behaviors. Children are referred to Grafton usually due to certain behaviors that have made it incredibly difficult, if not impossible, for them to be safely served in a community setting. Because ABA is unapologetic about its focus on behaviors and their antecedents, as things that are targets for change, as factors to be changed to either elicit or extinguish a behavior, as functional or non-functional, it might seem that ABA excludes trauma-informed thinking. This thinking is focused on a person's inner dialogue, their psychological life, their view of themselves and their surroundings, so it's not so easily quantifiable. At Grafton, though, we do not believe that ABA and trauma-informed approaches are mutually exclusive. In this conversation, our panelists will discuss how ABA services can be used effectively within a trauma-informed approach. They'll share examples of person-centered and individualized ABA services and how they have been implemented successfully in the treatment of clients with some of the most complicated presentations. We want to acknowledge from the outset that we don't have all the answers. ABA is evolving just as psychology is evolving and medicine itself is evolving, as any applied science evolves. We've found a great deal of benefit for our clients by attempting to reconcile these two approaches. So today we'll have a candid, honest, and respectful conversation. Feel free. We want you to ask us questions. And with that, let me introduce our two panelists. Maggie Hashemzadeh began working at Grafton as a behavior specialist providing in-home services to kids while under the supervision of a BCBA. After becoming a board-certified behavior analyst herself in 2014, Maggie continued to provide in-home services before transitioning to work in the group home setting, where she oversaw the implementation of ABA services for clients in the school and group home settings at Grafton. In January of 2018, Maggie became the clinical administrator of our Berryville campus, which is a psychiatric residential treatment center, and she's grown the implementation of ABA services at that setting. Allison Hoffmaster is a learning engineer at Ukeru. With several members of her family having worked at Grafton, Ukeru's parent organization, Allison was inspired by the ability to have a positive impact on clients' lives. After graduating from college, she joined Grafton as a direct support professional, moving on to become a one-to-one aide in a classroom and later a behavior specialist. Allison truly understands the effect of trauma-informed approaches and what they can do for an individual, and she's witnessed it firsthand with her daughter, Lila. Today, she will speak from both her behavior specialist experience as well as her experience as a mother. So let's start with the most elemental component of ABA, behaviors. Maggie, can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Scott. So simply put, a behavior is an action that is observable and measurable. And to go along with that, I'll talk about behavior analysis being the science that's dedicated to understanding human behavior in order to improve a person's life. And we love to focus specifically on behaviors and skills that are socially significant for a person. We look specifically at a behavior that is occurring and how often it's occurring in order to determine why it's occurring. And there's a variety of reasons that a behavior may occur, and by observing this human behavior, we can create a hypothesis of that. In order to do so, we have to look at an antecedent, which is what happens before a behavior occurs, and also the consequence, which is what happens after a behavior occurs. And I just want to make sure everyone's aware that a consequence is not necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. It is simply just what happens after a behavior happens. By observing somebody in their whatever setting they're in, we're able to collect data in order to determine the function of a behavior, which really helps us understand the why of a behavior might be happening. So the four functions of behavior are an automatic or a sensory input, access to a tangible item, or escape or avoiding something, and attention. So once we've been able to collect enough data, we're able to help figure out what the function might be and predict why a behavior might be occurring in the future. We use this information to be able to teach new skills as well as decreasing challenging behavior. And I want to put out there too that a lot of time, especially working in the psychiatric residential treatment center, we have clients who, it's their inner dialogue that might be causing that behavior. And even though I can't observe or measure what their inner dialogue is, I can certainly observe and measure the environment in which they're in and the things that are happening around them. And I can use my data and say, okay, I don't know what the antecedent is because something is going on with them in their inner dialogue, and I don't know what's happening. And that's okay that I don't know what's happening, but through data collection, I'm able to at least determine that. So it's totally possible that, somebody's inner dialogue is what's causing their challenging behavior, but I don't know that for sure unless I've observed and measured that information.
Thanks, Maggie. So given that description, let's turn to the other side of the equation, to trauma-informed thought. Allison, how would you describe trauma-informed thinking?
When I think about trauma-informed approach, I think about it's having an appreciation for the high prevalence of traumatic experiences that a person will go through if they receive developmental, behavioral, or mental health services. It's also having an appreciation for the effects that trauma has on our brains, how we function neurologically, but also how we function biologically, psychologically, and socially. We want to focus on what happened to the individual instead of maybe what's wrong with them. And here with Ukeru, we practice using universal precautions for trauma-informed approach, which means treating all individuals we serve as there's some type of possible trauma history, because it can only benefit them in some way. We want to make sure we're creating an environment that is safe, supportive, and it avoids re-traumatization. Positive relationships will help someone create an environment to learn new skills, provide the individual with motivation, reinforcement, and support that they'll need to try new responses. Trauma is pervasive and far-reaching. It's worth considering, for example, that the number of abused and neglected children in 2013 alone was 679,000. That's enough to fill 7.5 football stadiums full of trauma victims. Grafton's philosophy of one of comfort versus control, helping clients thrive in the least restrictive environment consistent with achieving the best outcome. The organization employs a trauma-informed approach, creating a supportive caregiving environment sensitive to clients' past experiences of violence and victimization. At Grafton, we take a trauma-informed approach, which means that we learn about the individual before they step through the door, and from the individual as they're here and through their experiences in our care. We use universal precautions in which one expects the presence of trauma in lives of individuals, so that we do avoid creating experiences that will re-traumatize them. We want to make sure that we know how it affects them biologically, psychologically, and socially. So we can do this by realizing the prevalence of trauma, responding of how trauma affects us, and recognizing this by putting it into knowledge. So we know that there was a why behind every behavior that we see, and we focus on trying to identify that why. And then we acknowledge that safety needs to be our first job, because we know that someone needs to feel safe before they can learn from us. So we prioritize relationship building. We want to make sure we're in sync with our own feelings. How are we feeling going into a situation? We need to consider our own emotional state when becoming involved, so we can have an impact on whether our involvement helps or hinders the situation. We want to make sure our engagement is positive and supportive, so we can build and continue to build that positive relationship and build rapport. We want to reassure rather than reprimand an individual to have the trauma-informed approach and using a comfort versus control philosophy.
Thanks, Allison. So it sounds to me like trauma-informed approach may provide some clues as to what we would be looking for from an applied behavioral analysis perspective to address the person's needs. So we have a basic foundation now. Let's talk a little bit about the application of these two theories together. Maggie?
Sure, absolutely. So I think that Allison did a great job saying, you know, what Ukeru is really focusing on is the relationship building and the use of positive reinforcement. And positive reinforcement is one of the primary techniques that is used within behavior analysis. Positive reinforcement, simply put, is adding something in order to increase the likelihood that a behavior will occur again in the future. And we at Grafton are constantly using positive reinforcement. And the basis of ABA for me and for most BCBAs is relationship building and building a rapport. You know, I'm not going to walk into a session or any setting really for any child, whether they receive ABA as a service or not, and make demands of them just because I know the skills and the philosophy of ABA doesn't mean that they're going to do it if they don't know me. So the basis of everything for me is building a relationship. And, you know, there's a lot of times where I'll build a relationship with somebody and we will go, you know, a couple months, a couple weeks, whatever, and all of a sudden maybe they're not really interested in hanging out with me. And so we have to go back to rebuilding rapport, because rapport is really the basis of this. And I'm not going to get very far with anybody if they don't like me, if I don't take an interest in the things that they're interested in. And the same goes for trauma-informed care. As Allison said, you know, you have to build a relationship first. Oftentimes, you know, the kids that come to Grafton, it's part of the worst part of their life is that they have to be put into a residential setting or a group home setting. And they've been through a lot. And whether it's, you know, trauma in the sense of abuse or neglect, or just trauma in that, you know, while their family maybe never abused or neglected them, their challenging behavior is just so severe that the family doesn't have the skills to be able to care for them. So they need a multidisciplinary team and professionals to be able to help them. So being placed in a residential treatment center or a group home is traumatic in itself. And so the first thing I need to do always is to build a relationship with them. And if that means that I'm going to their group home or their residential setting and we're just going to the playground on day one, then that's what it means. If that's what it takes for them to build a relationship with me, then that's what we do. The other thing we focus on too, and I know Allison can speak to this as well, is strengths-based. We want to focus on what people are good at from the very beginning. And when we get a kid that's referred to us, that's what I look for first. Everything's already bad enough. So what am I going to do differently based on the good information that I do have for somebody in order to help them develop and progress positively in their life? So I don't know if everyone knows the story of our founder, Ruth Birch, but Ruth Birch started Grafton in 1958, and she was radically strengths-based. She started a school because her son had dyslexia and he couldn't be served in the public school setting because in 1958, dyslexia was the most challenging disability that they really had to deal with, I guess. And so she pulled her son out of public school and she brought him home. And then, little by little, she had a house full of, kids that she was educating. And in particular, if she had a child that was incredibly interested in horses. And so she made everything that he did about horses, math lessons about horses, go to the horse farm and learn, the skills that you need to be able to take care of the horse. So Grafton's kind of been onto this for a long time, and it was a simple idea that was so powerful, and it works. So trauma-informed care and ABA go together because of that building of rapport. And taking into consideration things that have happened before the day arrives. I once had someone, tell me that they had heard from another BCBA that, behavior analysts don't consider things that have happened to someone. And this woman had said, well, what if their grandmother had just died? And I speak for myself as a behavior analyst. Of course, I can't speak for everybody. But I, of course, am going to take into consideration if your grandmother just died. I actually, every time I walk into a room, try to take into consideration, if I know something happened the night before with a child, even if it's something minor, they got in a fight with a friend, maybe they got a bad phone call, maybe they had a bad court date, I don't know. I take it into consideration before I go in and say, all right, we're going to start working on this task analysis that I know is way too difficult for you, but we're going to start on it anyway, because I'm probably going to get aggressed against or, an absolute refusal to not do that. So we definitely take into consideration things that have happened before either that session, that day, before they even come to Grafton, whatever the case may be. And then another question we often get, is behavior analysis only for decreasing challenging behavior? And it's not. It's absolutely not. We definitely have a lot of challenging behavior to decrease, but those behaviors are happening as communication for things that they're unable to do. So whether it's skills that they're not good at, or they don't know how to communicate effectively, challenging behavior is happening for those reasons. And I have to find something that is functionally equivalent to the challenging behavior. So if I'm being hit by a child and it's because they don't know how to ask for help, then I'm going to teach them how to ask for help. So Allison, have you, I know you were a behavior specialist. What kind of experience do you have with, teaching kids those new skills to learn in order to help them decrease their challenging behavior?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the example you gave of teaching communication is very important because a lot of times we will have children that come to Grafton that don't know how to communicate their needs, or that they've displayed this behavior for so long that it's got a need met for them. So maybe if you get really close to me, Maggie, and I bite you and you back away. So now it keeps happening and over, so to the point where I think that if I bite someone, that's how I get my need of personal space. So it's our job, and what we focus on is teaching them how to communicate to us that they need space, whether it's a break, it's in a quieter area, or whatever they need in that moment. And when we focus on building a rapport, focus on how their day has been and everything that you just said, we see that our clients are more successful. And that's our goal, is to give them the best quality of life that they absolutely can have.
Awesome.
This is great. I think we should come out of the philosophical and let's get down into the application here. Allison, do you want to talk a little bit about your own experience with your daughter and this type of service?
Yes, absolutely. So I'll start out by introducing you guys to my daughter, Lila. Lila joined my family in 2017. She was in a residential placement for 9 years prior to moving home with me. So during her transition to living at home with me, she received ABA services through Grafton. Her ABA services were so beneficial for Lila, but also our whole family. When she moved home with us, her BCBA and her RBT focused on goals that made her more successful in our home and in the community. We worked together on teaching Lila how to go eat at a restaurant, how to go shopping at the grocery store, as well as working on her safety awareness skills that we needed in the home. They used the community as her classroom for most of her sessions. I can remember actually going out to a restaurant so we can work on her goals, or before, shopping was very hard for us, so we decided we started at Lowe's because there was less of a temptation of the food aisle and stuff until we could gradually move up to going grocery shopping at Walmart. I always felt included in Lila's ABA therapy and that we used the collaboration approach together. Her team was so trauma-informed with their approaches, and they took into account her trauma history and what she had been through throughout her life. We started each session with discussing how her day was at school, or if she had had any seizures that day or since their last session. They not only targeted her aggressive behaviors, her self-injurious behaviors, but they also taught Lila communication. They taught her how to socialize, and they taught her safety awareness skills. Her ABA services provided us with alternative replacement behaviors, affecting coping strategies, and they improved her quality of life. An example I'm going to share with you today is how her RBT, Tyler, gave her a voice and a choice at her monthly meetings. In the past, Lila did not like to attend her MDT meetings, which also made it very difficult for me to fully participate in them. Tyler was very creative during all of his sessions, but he knew how important it was for her attendees. So he made them fun based off Lila's interest. Each meeting had a different theme for Lila. So for example, one meeting was a Disney princess theme just because her favorite movies are Disney. She sat at the table the entire meeting with a smile on her face. The next month was close to Easter, so each part of her treatment plan was hidden in an Easter egg around my home, which also made it very fun and exciting for Lila. Over time, Lila truly loved these meetings, and honestly, I can say they were a lot more fun for me too. I'm forever grateful that we were provided these ABA services to help Lila transition into our home. Maggie, I know you have some great examples as well.
Yeah. So I'd like to talk about a child in particular who was referred to Grafton from another facility. And as a clinical administrator, I often read about children long before they get to Grafton. And as I was reading about this child, I thought, everything about this person reads as if she would be appropriate for our setting. But I did have concerns because she was being restrained every single day at the setting that she was in. And she had a pretty traumatic history with struggles at home, and everything. When I read that she was being restrained every day, I thought, okay, I should probably go see this child. At Grafton, we've worked really hard to reduce restraint and seclusion. So if somebody is being restrained every day, it concerns me that we wouldn't be able to provide something for them that they're used to having. And as soon as I met this child, I thought this child has just been with people who don't have the skill set that we necessarily have. And I think this child could be really successful with us. So I told the team, bring her in, and we did. And after getting to know her, I found out, she was being restrained every time she would scream. So not necessarily being aggressive or engaging in property destruction or anything super serious, she would just scream. And I think that their understanding of it was that that was her precursor to severe challenging behavior. So they would just jump right in with a restraint instead of giving her other options. And of course, I wasn't there, so I can't specifically speak for them, but that's just based off of what I read. And I am so excited for this child because they have made so much progress with us. She's never been restrained with us, and we took all of her interest into account when working with her. At first, she wouldn't do any schoolwork. She would go to school and she would sit in this little, we call it a little quiet area. It's just right outside the classroom. It usually has a beanbag and other sensory objects that she can engage in. And she would sit in that little area and just listen to her MP3 player the whole time. And now I'm so excited for her because she is consistently happy. She is doing her schoolwork. She's doing the things that her family wants her to do. She's been active in her family therapy and her treatment at Grafton. And so I'm just so excited for her and the progress that we've been able to make with her. And I'm super proud of the team that worked with her for, taking it step by step, starting at the beginning and figuring out who she was and what she liked before placing too many demands. And of course, I have tons of examples of children that we've worked with. And one in particular is a child that came to us, and he had an incredible interest in hotels. He loved everything about them. He wanted to visit all the hotels. He knows where all the hotels are, has particular hotels that he likes rather than like Super 8s. He always tells me don't stay at the Super 8s. Like I need to stay at a Marriott. And so once I got to know him, I thought, okay, I have to use this to his advantage, to my advantage. And we worked up his skills. We worked on conversation skills. That was probably one of the biggest things, was working on his social skills. And I used hotels for everything. I had people all over Grafton and Ukeru that were going to hotels, bringing me things that I could use, that he could have. And it gave him an opportunity to have a conversation with so many people. And he got to meet all these people and work on the skills that we had been practicing within the services that I was providing to him. And that's just one of my favorite stories of a child who's made so much progress using his specific interests.
And I think that even goes for us as well. We're more likely to engage in an activity or a conversation if we're interested in what we're talking about or what we're doing. We don't want to participate in something that is not based off our interest or we like.
Absolutely, absolutely. And further than Grafton, just in relationship building outside of Grafton, in personal relationships, you're not really going to get to know someone or have a good relationship with them if maybe you don't find a way to do the things that they like to do. On a personal level, my dad loves to golf, and I thought, what a better way to spend time with my dad than getting over the fact that I think it's hot and boring. I'm just going to learn, and I'm going to go, and I'm going to do it with him. And it actually ends up being really fun because my dad he doesn't know it, but he uses positive reinforcement for me when I do good things. And he loves that I go with him, and it's helped, me build a stronger relationship with him. So it can be used anywhere.
Right, absolutely.
Thanks, guys. I want to turn to some questions because really I'm glad that we have as much time left over as we do, because I was hoping we could have a dialogue around this with folks. I think that from my experience, when I came to Grafton, I had come from specifically always a psychiatric setting. So, social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists, and I did not have much exposure to ABA and to behaviorism. And my initial feeling was that, to be perfectly frank, it seemed all very mechanical to me. And that in some ways was a little threatening because most of us therapists were very comfortable in an applied philosophy kind of model as opposed to an applied science or behaviorism model. And in getting to know ABA and getting to know what it could do to help unlock some of the mysteries that we were struggling with some of the children we served, it was obvious that it was a tool that really had to be brought to bear, given the population we were serving and the complications we address. And our experience in merging ABA and psychotherapy professionals together into one coherent multidisciplinary treatment team has been one of, frankly, mutual regard. And I think really excellent synergy and information sharing. Everyone makes everyone else better. And we opted at our residential treatment center to have two clinical administrators, one being a behavior analyst, Maggie, and the other one a marriage and family therapist. And again, the whole of this is so much better than its parts, because they are inspiring their team to really look at these kids in a very comprehensive way, incorporating both the behavioral aspects of what we're seeing, but also the child's inner dialogue, their story, and their own experience of living. So it's been very fruitful for us at Grafton. So with that, I just want to remind attendees that you can submit questions throughout the questions pane in your attendee control panel, and we'll try to get to as many as we can in the remaining time. If by chance we don't answer a question or we don't get to a question before the end, we'll try and follow up with a response at a later point in time. So I'll turn back to Juliet. Can you let us know what questions have come in so far, and we can get the conversation started?
Yeah, they're coming in fast and furious. Actually, one really quick one that I think you could answer relatively easily is, what clinical populations does Grafton serve?
Well, that's complicated because Grafton serves a lot of different populations. Primarily, we focus on folks with extremely complex comorbid conditions. So many of our clients have an intellectual disability, a developmental delay, or autism spectrum disorder, in addition to a psychiatric disability. We serve youth in the residential treatment center, for example, also who do not necessarily have intellectual or developmental disability, that may present primarily with a psychiatric diagnosis, and a whole host of other folks as well. But it's a very complex comorbid population that we serve throughout our organization.
Maggie, we had a question of, what does a session with you look like?
It can look like whatever it needs to look like. It just depends on the client's goals. It depends on, it just depends. There are times where, we are doing the typical discrete trial training kind of stuff, sitting at a table and, learning to mand and tact and echoics and that kind of thing. But it also can be, if I have a child who, their primary referral behavior is elopement and lack of safety awareness, meaning that they don't understand that if you walk out into a street, you could get hit by a car, then I'm going to teach those skills. And maybe that could start by sitting at a table and teaching them, like, what a safety sign looks like, what is a stop sign, what is a crosswalk sign. But it has to build up into a natural environment setting. And if that means that we are contriving situations where I park a car in the middle of, Berryville's campus and we practice crossing the street with a car there, then that's what that looks like. And so it really just has to be client focused, depending on their goals. I hope that answers that question.
And at Grafton, I would say that we're very creative. Like, we live off the power of creativity and how we can be creative with probing these goals and making it as realistic as we can.
I like to always tell people, to remind people too that, like, the ultimate goal here is to make or to help children become, functioning, independent members of society. And am I going to be able to sit down at a table for a session with a 16-year-old who is about to be an adult? No, that's probably not the best use of my time. And I need to be focusing on the things that are going to, help him in his future. And if that means, working on those vocational skills, working on hygiene skills, whatever it is for that specific child. So it can also, and I think Allison talked about how with Lila, we did a lot of community, or they did a lot of community settings. You know, Lila wasn't going to learn how to go through the store if she wasn't actually put in that setting. And so that's the best way for her to learn. Go ahead, Scott.
The other thing I observed, though, was that there was a tendency in myself and in a lot of therapists to always leap to the complex conclusion about what might be driving a particular behavior. And sometimes it took a good behaviorist to come in and say, look, it's very simple. An example would be a child who is, one example that's floated around Grafton for years is a child who was constantly grabbing at staff in their chest area. And, you know, everyone was struggling with, is this some sort of sexualized behavior that we need to address, et cetera. And it took a behaviorist to say, has anyone gotten the medical exam? And then we discovered that there was a condition that she was suffering that was causing pain for her. So she was trying to communicate that pain. It was just bringing us back to the essentials of behavior and really not overthinking it. Can be very powerful.
Yeah. And to add to that, Scott, too, that kind of goes into the multidisciplinary team, and that leads me back to parsimony. You know, did we look at the most simple explanation for this behavior? You know, being in a psychiatric residential treatment center, I have the beauty of working with a psychiatrist, a therapist. That could be a LCSW, the psychologist, marriage family therapist, the LPC, whoever it is on that child's case. But those treatment team meetings, you know, the residential staff, you know, or the academic staff come in and say, okay, but they're not sleeping, they're up all night. What can we do instead? And, you know, they might look at me as the behavior analyst because they're up getting aggressive. When really, you know, maybe the kid's not on needs some melatonin to help sleep because they don't produce enough. And that could be the problem solver. You know, I'm not going to know. We're not going to know for sure unless we try things. And that's the beauty of having a multidisciplinary team, for sure.
So here's, sorry, go ahead, Scott.
No, I was just asking for more questions.
Oh, there you go. Well, we have plenty. So one question that's come in is about certification. Are you aware of an ABA certification process for clinicians who already hold a master's degree? These are clinicians who are knowledgeable in trauma and therapy, but could use some ABA techniques to enhance their already existing knowledge of behavioral therapy reinforcement.
Ooh,
Absolutely.
I can talk to that.
Oh, you want to talk about it, Scott?
Yes, because I came to
Go
Grafton as a psychotherapist and I was freaked out. And the first thing I did was go through the RBT training course, a registered behavior technician training course. I'll confess, I never went through the supervised practice to actually become a registered behavior technician, but it was so concretely put together that it basically dragged me through all those behaviorism courses I took in undergrad and grad school and forced me to remember and think them through and apply them. And it was a very comprehensive way to get grounded again in behaviorism.
And to add to that, just to give you know, that question a little bit more specifics, the RBT exam, or you know, to become a registered behavior technician, all you really need is a high school diploma and the 40-hour training course. And the service that we used for that training is called Relias, and I do think that that's available to anyone, can pay for that course. I think it's like $200, and it's a 40-hour training. And then if you want to become certified in it, you do have to be supervised by a behavior analyst. So at Grafton, we have we call them behavior specialists, registered behavior technicians, who are working directly with the kids, but everything that they do is overseen by a BCBA. So that foundation that Scott talked about is great and is a great addition to your already master's level information that you have for, you know, whatever field you're in. But if you want to be able to implement it with somebody, you do have to be supervised by a BCBA.
Here's one that I think will ring familiar. What training approaches are helpful for equipping direct care staff with trauma-informed behavior support?
So at Grafton, we have an extensive 8-day training, and that includes, our Ukeru and trauma-informed care training. And the Ukeru model includes the prevention, intervention, and de-escalation techniques that need to or can be used with children. But I'd have to say too, there's been many occasions where I've given people the extra RBT training, and then the ongoing communication with a clinician and a DSP, direct service professional, is very important. And while we are all trained in Ukeru, and the techniques that we're taught in there are awesome, having specifics for a child is incredibly important. And so that's what our treatment plans are put in place for, in order to be able to say, here's a specific technique that you should use with this child. Everybody that comes into Grafton, they're all at a different place of their life, and some kids need more reinforcement than others. And so, Ukeru doesn't account for that specifically. They talk about positive reinforcement for sure, but some kids need to be reinforced every 5 minutes, and other kids just are at the end of their treatment, and maybe they don't need to be. And the communication with the treatment team, or being a part of the child's treatment team, is the best thing that they get.
And Ukeru is our parent organization is Grafton, but we're also in over 250 organizations right now. 36 states, British Columbia, and Canada. So we do offer our training to other organizations if you're interested. And that does include, we talk about trauma-informed care, the comfort versus control approach. We talk about how trauma affects our brain. And so we can provide that training as well if you're interested.
And I think it's important to talk about, too, that there are cases where, I've called Ukeru team members and been like, can you help me with this? This is happening and I'm getting my hair pulled, or am I looking at this wrong? Or is there something else I can do? Just because I'm a behavior analyst doesn't mean that I know why, every single instance why something might be happening. And having Ukeru there to help me in some situations has been incredibly helpful as well.
Mm-hmm. And that's something we do for all of our customers as well. If they ever need anything, they can always contact us and help for additional support.
Someone is asking about, in California, they're being asked to incorporate trauma-informed care into behavior plans. They feel like they're applying the principles but are having a hard time putting them on paper. How do you write this into a plan?
So in our treatment plans, we have, even just a prompt that tells us, what is the trauma-informed considerations, and we write in there all of the things that we are aware of having happened to them, and how that could affect a child. In particular, I remember a case where a child was triggered by the color orange, and this was because of abuse that occurred while her abuser was wearing orange on a regular basis. And so we had to take that into consideration. Anything orange in this dorm, or in this room could be triggering for her. But does that mean that we got rid of the color orange? No, we didn't. We didn't eliminate that. We just had to help teach her how to cope with that. And so I can see where it can be challenging to write that up inside of a treatment plan, but we build that into everything that we do. I'm actually supervising people to become behavior analysts as well, and we were just working on lesson plans yesterday, and I had to help her, spruce up her trauma-informed considerations, because sometimes when you're in the setting so often, you do forget some of the things that an outsider might not understand. You know, it's common practice for me to have to deal with aggression and stuff like that. So it's easy to forget, you know, what little things might have happened to someone that could build up to trauma. Trauma-informed consideration can simply be something as this person was removed from their family, and that needs to be considered in working with this child. So I hope that answers that question as well.
I think it's really important to take the time to ask yourself, what is this child's story? And I think when you're so focused on behavior and antecedents and reinforcement strategies, et cetera, it really pays sometimes to let your mind run a little free and conceptualize what this kid's lived experience is. If they were to write a book, what would it be like? It can really help you kind of isolate some of the themes in that lived experience that may be impacting the here and now.
Actually, we got a follow-up question to that, which I'll just ask now, which is, wouldn't identifying the trauma as part of the 4-point contingency make it easier to incorporate this into the written plan?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And sometimes you might not be able to identify it specifically. And of course, in, you know, that isolated instance with the color orange, you could absolutely include it as part of the 4-point contingency. But there are also other things that might not be able to be considered in that instance, and you might have to look at it as a broader view, as Scott was saying. You know, what is their long-term history?
There were a couple questions about if we could talk a little bit more about comfort versus control and what that means.
So our comfort versus control approach is treating the person how we would want to be treated. You know, working in this field, we have to deal with some challenging situations, but really stepping back and thinking about, when we're upset, how do we want to be treated when we're upset? And when we're stressed and when we're feeling overwhelmed, what do we need in that moment? And for me personally, I need a little more space. I need a less verbal interaction, and I need people to tell me that I'm going to be okay, that it's safe here. And comfort versus control doesn't mean that we don't have expectations and we don't have limits and we don't have structure, because we still do have all of those things at Grafton, but it's how we deliver that message to someone. So we want to reassure them that rather than reprimanding them in that moment. And so it's really easy for us to be kind to someone when they're being kind to us, but what's really important to maintain a healthy, positive relationship is when someone's being not so kind to us, how do we remain kind to them?
And I think to add to that, Scott and I were actually talking earlier about there's comfort versus control, and there's also instructional control. And I have to develop instructional control with a child, with a group, with whomever, in order to be able to have those expectations and to have things for them. And I do build instructional controls through building a relationship with them, getting to know them, you know, teaching them that I'm there for them and that I can provide them with their basic needs and wants. You know, but at some point they have to learn to, you know, be able to follow simple directions and understand that there are expectations, you know, especially in a group setting. You know, our dorms, you know, have 6 to 8 kids in them. And it can be really difficult to develop that instructional control. But it's very important to do that and also have that comfort versus control mindset at all times. Do you have anything to add, Scott?
Just the easiest way I've been able to wrap my brain around it is that if you're at risk of pushing the child into incoherence with your demands, then you're not doing them a service, because nothing happens once we're incoherent. Learning stops, relationships stop and get disrupted, everything stops. It's more about surfing that wave where you are expanding their boundaries, creating just enough disequilibrium that they want to receive something new and learn something different, but not drive them into complete meltdown. And, you know, and I think most people, when they think ABA, unfortunately, as I did, before I understood it better, you think Lovaas. and Lovaas was very happy to push you into complete incoherence in the process of teaching you something new. So it really is a rejection of that, but it is not everyone gets to do what everyone wants to do. It's finding that balance.
Okay. Someone has asked, how does this look in a school that doesn't have the benefit of ABA certified staff? What advice do you give to campus administration to support teachers with a large number of students with trauma? Where do you start?
Well, I think first and foremost, there should be some advocating for the need for, at the very least, trauma-informed care. You know, obviously, I don't know if this is a public school setting or if it's a special ed setting or 500 kids or 20 kids, but trauma is happening all the time. In whether the kid has a learning disability or not, you know, trauma is out there. And I think it's up to the professionals, you know, to be advocating for these kids that we need to have trauma-informed care. And I can see from an administrative standpoint, maybe in a public school setting, where that might be hard to give all of those people that education. You know, with COVID-19 and, you know, how quickly this whole world has turned into a virtual thing, you know, maybe it could be even a virtual training, and, you know, Ukeru might be able to provide something like that if that would be something that somebody were interested in, and having just that simple trauma-informed care conversation.
I also think having a BCBA on speed dial is always optimal. They don't necessarily need to be on site if that's not the way the program is structured, although I think it's always better for them to be able to do direct observation. But just picking up the phone and talking can be very illuminating for us and our teams. And we, you know, we'll have BCBAs from one region of Grafton consulting on cases in other regions of Grafton frequently, just multidisciplinary, you know, spitballing and then talking through cases.
Maggie, someone has asked, so you said about trying to find a functionally equivalent behavior for the challenging behavior. Do you have any instance where you can use a non-functionally equivalent alternative?
I can't think of anything in particular to answer that question, because what I've found is, you know, sometimes when I teach a child to do something, oftentimes how behavior works is I might be able to decrease one behavior, and you know, maybe I can help decrease the aggression, but then the next week all of a sudden the child is yelling obscene profanities all day long, and maybe that's their replacement. So it's important to know that, you know, if I'm not helping them address the function of that behavior, then it's probably still going to occur. You know, yeah, I think that's the best way that I can answer that question.
Another question we've gotten, and we have time for a couple more questions, I think. Can you provide some examples of tools and strategies you use to advance communication skills of individuals who are minimally verbal, using limited range of functions? How does a trauma history inform the skill building vocabulary you focus on or include?
I would say, especially in those instances, helping them get their basic needs and wants met is the most important thing that you can do for them. You know, at that level, when there's, you know, not a whole lot of vocal communication for someone, I pretty much need to find a way to help them, you know, make sure they can ask for the bathroom, make sure they can feed themselves, make sure they can find access to water or going to bed or whatever the case may be, just their simple basic wants and needs. If we've used, we have modified sign language that we use with one child who, you know, is completely doesn't communicate verbally, but he communicates with gestures, and he's created his own name signs for people, and we've just reinforced him for doing that, and then we've learned what our name sign is. We've used I've used simple picture boards, and taking the icon off and handing in. That seems very elementary, but if that's all that the person can do, then that's all that the person can do. Allison, I don't know if you have any experience with adding anything to that.
Yeah, absolutely. My daughter Lila is actually nonverbal. So we started kind of the same line, making sure that we could teach her how to communicate her basic needs, if she needed something to eat, if she needed help, if she needed to go to the bathroom. And so we did start very small with just picture communication. We also added her interest in there, because we knew if we added some interest in there, she'd be more likely to use it, because she wanted to gain access to her Disney princess movies. Exactly. And she wanted to gain access to her body socks. So we added those things in there. And then we moved up to different communication devices. But what it takes is time, consistency, and repetition. You really have to make sure you're continuously working with the person and you're providing that reinforcement when they ask for things. And maybe for Lila, what we did was just getting my attention, teaching her how to walk up and just tap me on the shoulder when she needed me.
Yeah, and I think it's, there's a lot of really awesome communication devices out there, and always consult with a speech therapist too. That's what they do. And so it's really important to consult with them. But I won't lie, I've received communication devices for children that have been incredibly overwhelming. And there's way too many I think there are way too many icons. And I've been surprised for a child to, totally take to it and be able to use it. And then the next kid, he throws it at me. Mm-hmm. And so we really just have to figure out what works for that person. And I've been stuck in jams before too, because, it's written in an IEP that I have to provide this child with their communication device. And then every time we hand it to him, he throws it at us because he'd rather use gestures. From an IEP standpoint, we're supposed to be using it. So we try to use it, and then it becomes a weapon. And so it gets hard. And, so yeah, I hope
what I'm hearing though is part of that culture change. Part of that culture change of becoming a trauma-informed organization is really taking your role as a behavior detective seriously. And I never experienced that as much as I've experienced it here, that we don't apologize for seeing the behaviors of concern that cause them to come into our care in the first place as puzzles to be solved. And you've got to come up with a complicated and comprehensive story about how this all manifested in the first place if you're ever going to introduce any alternatives that might work for the kid downstream. So I think that that's a big key to transforming an organization, is really encouraging the staff to see themselves as behavior detectives. And I think,
I'm sorry, Scott, go ahead.
Do we have time for one more, you think, Juliet?
Yeah. I think one more question, and this is actually, I think, a good one maybe to close on. Someone just wanted to kind of revisit and maybe unpack a little bit the relationship between ABA and trauma in terms of rapport. I think they just kind of wanted you to kind of restate it and maybe explain it a little further.
So I think the basis for both of us, you're both, is rapport building, is establishing with someone the things that they like, and using those to your advantage. I've got kids that love dinosaurs, and as a story to tell, he found a snakeskin, and I thought, well, holy cow, he wants to keep this snakeskin, and there's absolutely no way we're doing that. So I've got to find something else for him. And so I bought reptiles and I hid them around, and we made a deal that, the snakeskin could stay over here and he could visit it every once in a while, but we were going to go on a scavenger hunt for reptiles, and that satisfied that need for him. And I didn't have a temper tantrum over a snakeskin, thank goodness. But I think that just finding their strengths and the things that they like. I start every admission meeting with, tell me what you like, tell me the things that you want to do. We've got a basketball court. Do you like to play basketball? And at least, setting that out from the very first day, like, oh, this woman, she is paying attention to me. She read that I like basketball. She read that I like Roblox, whatever it is, helps set a good impression from the very beginning. I don't know, Allison, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, and so like Maggie said, you know, building that rapport, but also what their day had been. And we would never want to do anything that would re-traumatize them using a trauma-informed approach. So we really do look at their history before they came to us. And if we figure out something that is causing them distress, we meet together as a team and figure out what it could be causing this, and then we don't use it again in the future. We base all of our sessions off their likes and how we can make them learn the best that they can, and having that collaborative approach.
Well, I want to be sensitive to everybody's busy schedule, so we're at, what are we at, 3:01 p.m. Eastern Time, according to my computer, which is slightly off, I think. But I think we're at the end of our time. Thank you, Allison and Maggie, for sharing all of this with us today, and thank you, everyone, for joining us in the discussion. Please join us soon for more trauma-informed topics. In the meantime, you can stay in touch by following the hashtag #StartsWithYou on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And if you have questions that we were not able to respond to here in the presentation, we will certainly do that afterwards. So on behalf of all of us, thank you once again for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.